Why are cities the way they are? As a twice certified permaculture designer who is commuted by bike or public transit in 7 U.S. cities, I've tried to understand urban design. The key, design embodies intention. Everything you see in this picture is there for a reason. Somebody intended it to be there. In today's episode, I'll explore how intention works in the built environment, what its limitations are, how it succeeds and fails, and some powerful new intentions for cities. Welcome to Edenicity, best practices for sustainably abundant cities. The first thing to know about intentions in design is that they can't anticipate all consequences. When I was in middle school, I spent pretty much the first year recesses holed up in the library because I hadn't hit my growth yet, and there were some pretty big kids pushing me around. But one week, the library was closed for repairs, so I was out on the playground with everyone else. And this very nice girl approached me and asked why she hadn't seen me before. Maybe I was new to the school. So I told her that I had spent most of my time up in the library, and she wanted to know what I read up there. Well, I was on a bit of a technology kick at the time, and I was reading about lasers, these beams of light that could burn their way through solid chunks of metal. And her eyes just got really wide as she was listening to this. And she said, "Oh, wow, I hope those don't hurt anybody." The sincere concern that she had for anybody who might encounter a laser in the future took me aback. As a 12-year-old boy, I was thinking about them in terms of cool explosions and weapons and things like that, but trying to sell her on the industrial uses of it and realizing, well, even in industry, you have to be very careful with these things. You could get hurt. I think we talked about, well, what if it burns through a steel plate and there's somebody on the other side? So that was my first little hint that in design, it is very challenging to anticipate all consequences. A more common example of unanticipated consequences is cars, which to most people offer more freedom, but they're also responsible for crashes. And for everybody who unfortunately dies in a car crash, maybe 2 people died due to air pollution caused by cars, and 3 due to inactivity caused by a car-dependent lifestyle. And in addition, cars contribute to sprawl, and they can rob children growing up of their freedom, as I discussed last week. And we'll discuss what to do about that in a moment. A third example is species introductions, which can be new economic opportunities. Crops that have been introduced all over the world grow better in some locations than in others. Potatoes and tomatoes from the Americas, apples from Europe, but in some cases, species introductions can be catastrophic. I spent part of my childhood in Honolulu, Hawaii, and Hawaii is the endangered species capital of the world. It's one of the most isolated groups of islands in the world. Throughout its prehistory, new species introductions happened about once every 150,000 years, if I recall my grade school geography lessons correctly. So it was brutal when humans introduced rats and pigs and goats and numerous new species of birds that in many cases outcompeted and drove to extinction some of the native species. In Australia, the adorable bunny rabbit has run amok on the landscape, having a similar effect. Therefore, designers must expand their awareness and understand the intentions of everyone who will live with their design, including members of other species. Design, when it comes to things like species introductions, have consequences that are much bigger than an individual family or homestead. Consequences are political, legal, scientific, and regulatory. The next thing to know about intentions in design is that they can be misaligned. Business income depends on basically 3 things: price, number of customers, and the frequency of purchase. Fortunes have been made, obviously, selling unhealthy but highly appetizing treats people keep buying and rebuying. And when I was a kid and got my first allowance, I think it was a quarter a week, which is $1,000 in today's dollars. No, it was $1.77 in today's dollars. It was just enough in those days to buy 1 or 2 candy bars a week. So I'd get some change and then be able to buy 2 the next week, that sort of thing. So it was 10 cents at first, but very quickly, manufacturers made slightly bigger candy bars and sold them for 15 cents. And of course, that was enough where there was a penny tax, and so that complicated my finances for a little while. But then I noticed something. I noticed that the candy bars gradually shrunk back to the original size that they sold at 10 cents, but they retained the 15-cent price back in 1973, 1974 timeframe. The more costly consequence of misaligned intentions is planned obsolescence. We would like our cars to run trouble-free for a long time, but that reduces profits. Henry Ford, founder of the Ford Motor Company, used to go to junkyards and sort through old cars made by his company and look for which parts never, ever broke down. And when he found them, he would go back to his factory and have them made out of either cheaper materials or using less material to save some costs, that eventually pretty much every part on one of his cars would wear out at about the same time. Yet another example of misaligned intentions is that landlords may neglect energy upgrades in their apartments because tenants pay utilities. So one of my jobs as a designer is to try to align intentions between all the parties involved with the design, the builders and the end users, as much as possible, so that everybody is pulling in the same direction toward good performance. Intentions can unfortunately also be cruel and biased. This is a redlining map of lending risk made for the U.S. Federal Housing Administration, or established under the National Housing Act of 1934. Red areas indicate high lending risk, and most banks would simply not lend to anybody who lived in those areas. These were, unfortunately, neighborhoods where most people were members of ethnic minorities or immigrants. Redlining was outlawed by the Fair Housing Act of 1968. But even today, families that survived redlining have about 1/10 of the average family wealth in the United States. All humans have prejudice and bias. None of us are free of it, but it's a design error to build this bias and prejudice into a design. Trying to do more or less of something is a failure to design. It lacks intention and mainly benefits the status quo. Road widening often fails due to induced demand. If our intention is to move more people with greater safety and less environmental damage, then the correct design solution usually looks more like mass transit, which is 17 to 20 times safer per person and moves 10 to 30 times more people per lane. And by the way, I've put all my sources in the description to this episode, and while you're looking for that, go ahead and click that subscribe button if it's visible, and the like button if you're finding this interesting. Another example of the disconnect between intention and actual design happens when we very naturally get upset about continued environmental damage around the world. It's really important to make people conscious of these problems, but that in itself is not design. Worse yet, the messaging around a lot of these protests has come across as shame or even austerity, and neither of these have slowed any of the environmental damage that we've seen around the world. Again, this is self-expression, which is great, and wishful thinking, which is part of design, but it is not design itself. Design is about creating actual new patterns in the world. Let's look at how design succeeds with clear, fully aligned, unbiased intentions. Singapore was desperately poor and plagued with burning squatter camps and race riots when it launched its Housing Development Board in 1960. With full government backing, the HDB built over 21,000 new homes in 2 years, more than the British had when they occupied Singapore over the preceding 31 years. The government of Singapore has gone on to build 1.4 million housing units because it's made housing a human right. And I'll argue in more depth in other episodes that this was a deliberate economic strategy of self-improvement that other cities worldwide can emulate, regardless of geography. With these lessons in mind, here are the intentions for Edenicity. We would like safe, healthy, walkable, affordable, transit-oriented, energy-secure, food-secure cities in order to end the mass extinction and restore the lost half of life on Earth, which I've discussed in many other episodes. I'll leave you with this summary video of designing a sustainable city. Next week's video will look at design from another perspective. And to see how it all fits together, have a look at the Edenicity reference design, which is available in the links in the description. Take care, stay green, see you next time.